The scream was a whisper swallowed by the city, a sound only I, perched high above the labyrinthine streets of Beirut, would ever truly hear. It was Samir's moment of realization, a guttural expulsion of breath as the reality of his capture crashed down upon him. And in that breath, I felt a strange pang of emptiness. I found my perch tonight, a dusty room in a bombed-out apartment block overlooking the souk, the air thick with the scent of exhaust and roasting nuts. The city was a canvas of shadows, the setting sun bleeding orange into the smog-choked sky. Below, the chaotic ballet of Beirut unfolded. Honking cars, the chatter of vendors, the rhythmic thrum of distant generators. My world, for the past 18 months, had been contained within this cacophony, focused on the solitary figure of Samir Haddad. He was a ghost in plain sight, a man who moved through the city with the practiced ease of a phantom. Every morning, he'd emerge from his apartment in the G-Mesa district, a nondescript building wedged between a falafel shop and a tailor. He wore the same worn leather jacket, the same faded jeans, the same guarded expression that revealed nothing. He walked with a slight limp, a consequence of an old injury, a detail I'd committed to memory alongside the exact time he took his morning coffee. Precisely 7:17 a.m., from the same cafe, his order always a single espresso, no sugar. The routine was the essence of him, a predictable dance that made him both fascinating and maddening. I knew the angle of his head when he spoke to the shopkeeper, the slight twitch of his left eye when he was agitated, the way he hesitated before crossing a busy street, as if checking for unseen threats. My days were a symphony of minutiae, a slow accumulation of data points. The number of steps he took, the cadence of his voice, the brands of cigarettes he smoked, all meticulously logged in a hidden notebook. The souk was a vortex of activity. Merchants hawked their wares, their voices a relentless tide. Children shrieked with laughter, weaving between the crowded stalls. The air hung heavy with the aroma of spices, the metallic temps of fresh meat, and the ever-present scent of the sea carried on the occasional breeze. Samir navigated this chaos with the uncanny ability to remain unseen, melting into the crowd like a chameleon. My job was to peel back the layers, to find the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The physical strain was relentless. Long hours hunched over surveillance equipment, the ache in my back, the sting of fatigue in my eyes, all became part of the cost. The psychological toll was far more insidious. The isolation, the constant vigilance, the slow erosion of my own identity as I became increasingly immersed in his. I was a shadow, a whisper in the machine, and my own existence began to blur. Yet, despite the weariness, the monotony, there was a strange, addictive allure to the work. I was searching for the truth. The silence of the Beirut apartment pressed in on Leora, a physical weight she'd grown accustomed to, a comfort even, until the screams started, ripping through the carefully constructed calm of her surveillance. The first few months melted into a rhythm of routine, a relentless cycle of observation that blurred the edges of reality. From her window perch, high above the bustling streets, Samir Haddad's life unfolded in a predictable script. Wake at precisely 7 a.m., the creak of the balcony door, a cigarette lit against the rising sun, a meticulously prepared breakfast, eaten alone. The morning commute, always the same route, the same cafe for his espresso. The apartment itself, her temporary sanctuary, was a sterile expanse of surveillance equipment and barely lived-in space. Monitors glowed with the faces of the city, the voices of its inhabitants, all filtered through Leora's singular focus. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of her fingers on the keyboard became a metronome, counting out the passing days, weeks, months. The air hung thick with the aroma of stale coffee and the hum of electronics, a suffocating atmosphere that clung to her clothes, her skin, her very being. She'd meticulously documented every aspect of Samir's existence, his gait, his gestures, the subtle nuances of his interactions. She'd learned the timbre of his voice, the way the sunlight caught the glint of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand when he held his phone. But with each passing day, the details hardened, becoming a cold, clinical representation, a detached collection of data, devoid of human connection. The city, a vibrant tapestry of chaos and beauty, faded into the background. The cries of the street vendors, the honking of the taxis, the laughter of children playing in the alleyways, all became white noise, a constant drone that underscored her isolation. She ate prepackaged meals, her taste buds dulled by the repetitive diet, the flavors indistinguishable. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by fragmented images of Samir, his face a constant presence in her dreams. The psychological toll mounted, days blended into a monotonous stream, broken only by the sporadic alerts from the system, the brief, electric jolt of adrenaline that momentarily sharpened her focus. The apartment, once a haven, transformed into a prison of her own making. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with the weight of her solitude. Doubt, a insidious poison, began to seep into her thoughts. Was it all worth it? Was she merely a cog in a machine, sacrificing her own life for a purpose she no longer fully understood? The mission, the target, they were becoming abstract concepts, overshadowed by the gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume her. She found herself staring out the window at the vibrant life below, imagining the feel of the sun on her skin, the taste of food that hadn't come from a plastic container, the sound of laughter that wasn't filtered through a microphone. She was a ghost, a shadow, a presence unseen, unheard, a reflection in the mirrored glass, a watcher watching nothing but the passing of time, a life that was slowly slipping away. The mission was all that mattered, and for that, she would sacrifice it all. The world narrowed to a single, sharp exhale as the pharmacy door clicked shut. The sound, a tiny punctuation mark on the slow, drawn-out sentence of Samir Haddad's life, a sentence Leora had been diligently transcribing for 2 long years. The click echoed in the sterile silence of her observation post. A low-rent apartment overlooking the bustling street where she'd painstakingly built a fortress of data around the man. It wasn't the click itself, but the absence that followed. No immediate exit. No familiar return to the bakery for his morning coffee, or the park where he sat on the benches feeding the pigeons. It was a deviation, a ripple in the otherwise predictable choreography of his days. Beirut, a city that thrived on chaos, had a rhythm all its own, a relentless pulse of honking cars, hawkers, cries, and the ever-present scent of exhaust fumes and jasmine. Leora had become so attuned to Samir's cadence that the slightest hiccup in his routine jarred her. He'd left his apartment at his usual hour, clad in the same worn leather jacket, the same careful slump in his shoulders that concealed an almost predatory stillness. He'd walked the usual route, past the overflowing garbage bins, the falafel stands, the children kicking a dusty football in the street. Then, at the edge of his routine, a turn she'd never recorded. The pharmacy, a small, nondescript place tucked away on a side street she'd only glanced at, a blur of white-coated figures and glowing fluorescent lights. The air in the apartment felt suddenly thin, the recycled air conditioning failing to cool the sudden prickle of anxiety against her skin. This wasn't a planned errand. Samir never frequented pharmacies. He was meticulous, predictable. This felt different. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, calling up the pharmacy's security feed, the grainy images slowly resolving as the security cameras of the pharmacy became her eyes. There he was, a pale ghost, framed by the glare of the shop lights. The angle was awkward. She was only able to see the back of Samir. He was interacting with the pharmacist, and then he was gone, vanishing back out into the bright morning. Leora replayed the footage, each frame a sliver of information that she desperately tried to piece together. The interaction was brief, too short to be conclusive. The pharmacist had barely looked up. There was no exchange of conversation that her microphones had picked up, no hint of emotion. Yet something felt wrong. The pharmacy visit had been deliberate, purposeful. This was not a quick stop for a pack of cigarettes. She found the pharmacist's gaze through the pharmacy footage and noted a momentary flash of recognition. She replayed the footage again, this time focusing on Samir's movements, his posture. He hadn't exhibited any signs of stress, but Leora knew how to read the subtle signals that most people missed, the micro-tense of a muscle. The slight shift in weight, the way his hands remained hidden within his pockets, a habit she'd come to associate with his guarded nature. She ran every piece of footage through the facial recognition software. No hits. She replayed the pharmacy footage several times. Nothing. A wave of frustration washed over her, a cold tide that threatened to drown her focus. 2 years, and she had nothing. She needed to know what was happening. This was a critical moment. She had to understand why he had changed his routine, why he had been at the pharmacy. She felt her chest constricting. Years spent monitoring, following the threads of his existence, and now a single deviation had unraveled everything. The silence, broken only by the hum of the computers, was a cage. The notification popped onto Leora's screen, a crimson flag against a field of gray, announcing the definitive link. Samir Haddad's DNA profile, pulled from a discarded coffee cup, matched the one on file, the file of a ghost she'd spent years chasing, of the architect who orchestrated the bombing of the Iranian Cultural Center in Buenos Aires. The data analysts, a hive of digital bees in their sterile warren, were buzzing with confirmation. The familiar weight of the city, the dust that perpetually coated everything in Beirut, pressed down on her. Cross-referencing, they called it, a delicate dance of algorithms, sifting through terabytes of intercepted communications, financial transactions, and travel records. They'd unearthed a medical profile matching Samir's purchase from the obscure pharmacy, a rare sensitivity to a specific antibiotic detailed in a stolen medical file. The odds of a coincidence were vanishingly small, and now the DNA. It was irrefutable. The target was no longer a shadow. He was a person. Leora felt a curious detachment. The culmination of years of relentless observation, of meticulously piecing together the minutiae of a life, felt anticlimactic, like reaching the summit of a mountain, only to find the view obscured by fog. She'd known, of course, deep in her gut, a feeling that had slowly solidified into a certainty with each passing surveillance hour. But the official confirmation, the blinking red light, was strangely underwhelming. Her focus shifted back to her screen, to the endless stream of data pouring in. The surveillance team on the ground, a constellation of hidden eyes and ears, were reporting heightened activity. Samir was restless. His movements, once predictable, were now erratic, his routines disrupted. He was starting to look over his shoulder, a subtle shift in posture, a fleeting glance that betrayed his awareness. The hunter was becoming the apartment, a nondescript flat in the heart of Beirut, became her primary focus. She watched him through the lens of a camera concealed in a nearby building. She saw the tension in his face as he walked out into the street. The way he kept close to the walls, his gaze darting from shadow to shadow. Days blurred into a single, extended breath. Leora lived and breathed Samir had. She absorbed the grit of the city through his eyes, the oppressive heat, the cacophony of the traffic, the constant buzz of a world on edge. She felt his paranoia seep into her own consciousness, a gnawing unease that mirrored his. She imagined him alone in his apartment, the curtains drawn, the walls closing in, the weight of his past, a leaden cloak, clinging to him, the knowledge that he was being watched, hunted by an unseen force he could not comprehend. It was a bleak existence, one that she understood intimately. The pressure built. She had been tasked with the impossible. Her task was to observe, and her job was not to be seen. Her only tools were time, patience, and a relentless attention to detail. She knew what was coming. The net was tightening. The threads of his life were being drawn together, a noose designed to hang around his neck. It was a game of cat and mouse, and she was only a silent, invisible observer. The air thickened with a silent understanding, a shared awareness that hung between them like a phantom limb. Samir Haddad knew he was being watched. The day the world fractured, the day the years of relentless observation crystallized into a single, terrifying truth. Leora Benami's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the mundane. He'd looked straight at her, not at her, but asterisk through asterisk her, as if the veil of anonymity that she'd carefully crafted for herself had been ripped away, leaving her exposed. The cafe, usually a comforting cocoon of stale coffee and whispered conversations, had become a cage. Leora found herself staring at her reflection in the darkened window, the woman staring back a stranger, etched with the strain of countless hours spent peering through a lens. The incessant hum of the city, once a soothing soundtrack to her surveillance, now grated on her nerves, a constant reminder of the unseen eyes that surrounded her, both those she directed and the one that might now be focused on her. She doubled her efforts, shifting positions, varying the routes she took to reach her vantage point across the street. Even the most seasoned professional could misstep, could betray themselves with a flicker of habit or a moment of carelessness. Samir's routine had been a predictable tapestry of morning coffee, late afternoon visits to the bakery, and evenings spent in the dim glow of his apartment, the same apartment that Leora had come to know intimately. Now, every movement was a calculation, every action a potential threat. The pressure mounted. Leora felt it in the knot of tension in her shoulders, in the way her vision blurred with fatigue. Sleepless nights spent parsing data, cross-referencing information, and desperately searching for a weakness in Samir's defenses had taken their toll. The apartment across the street became both a prison and a sanctuary. The apartment, her command center, and her lonely cell. She'd always found solace in the methodical rhythm of surveillance, the feeling of control that came with knowing. But now the world was shifting. The narrative was starting to twist. She could see it in the way he moved, in the subtle change in his gait. Gone was the relaxed swagger, replaced by a cautious, almost furtive grace. The subtle adjustments he made to his routine were telling, like a painter trying to erase an unwanted stroke. He varied his commute, using different routes, avoiding the usual shops, the familiar faces. He'd begun to look over his shoulder more, his eyes darting across the street, scrutinizing every shadow, every parked car. She knew she needed to pull back, to become less obvious, but the directive was clear. Maintain surveillance. Report on his reactions. Observe. 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 Leora had been trained to anticipate, to predict, to fade into the background. She was a ghost, a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the night. Now, however, the ghost had seen the other ghost. The whisper had been heard, the shadow glimpsed. The cat-and-mouse game was entering its final and most dangerous phase. The weight of the impending operation settled upon her, a heavy, cold presence that made her dread the dawn of the next day. The hunt had morphed into something personal, a dangerous dance in which both hunter and hunted knew they were locked. The tremor in Samir Haddad's hand, barely perceptible, was the first crack in the facade I had meticulously documented for 2 years, signaling the inevitable climax I knew was coming. The Beirut sun, a familiar hammer against the metal of the surveillance van, beat down as I watched him through the lens, my breath catching in my throat. He was outside a small, nondescript café, the type that dotted the city's backstreets, barely visible from the main road. The air hung thick with the scent of cardamom and diesel, the usual symphony of urban Beirut. He sat alone, nursing a small espresso, the ritual a part of the routine I had come to know intimately. The way he tapped his fingers on the table, the slight tilt of his head as he observed the passing street, these were the details that composed my world. A world now on the precipice of change. Then came the flash. It wasn't a physical light, but the digital equivalent, a silent signal that zipped across his phone's screen. A message. He paused. The tapping stopped. Abruptly, his posture stiffening, the relaxed curve of his body replaced by a coiled tension. I zoomed in, my heart thrumming against my ribs, each beat a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. His eyes, usually guarded, flickered with a raw emotion, a flicker of something close to fear. His lips moved, as if silently repeating a phrase. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew. The game had changed. The message, I later learned, was a confirmation. A rendezvous, arranged by his unseen masters. Attesci. I knew, with a certainty that settled in the pit of my stomach, that he would respond. Everything I had observed, the hours of meticulously collected data, all came to this moment. The routine, the predictability, the carefully constructed illusion of normalcy all were about to shatter. The sweat prickled my skin as I adjusted the microphone, the pressure intense, my throat felt thick, the air in the van suddenly too thin. His hand trembled again as he pocketed the phone, the metal casing catching the sunlight, glinting like a mocking eye. He finished his espresso in a single gulp, then rose, his movements now brisk, purposeful. The decision was made. The die was cast. He was, as they say, on the move. I tracked him as he paid his tab, the terse exchange with the cafe owner barely registering. He walked quickly, breaking the pattern of his stroll, heading towards the heart of the city, a place he usually avoided. I had to focus, a clear and decisive mindset. All my training, all my preparation led to this moment. My role in this was to observe and to report, not to interfere. That was the line I had sworn to uphold, the line I would not cross. The following hour was a blur of frantic activity. The surveillance team shifted, adjusted. I saw the faces on the comms, tense, focused. We had to relay the information, analyze the data, provide intel that would determine Samir's next step. The information I provided was crucial. I knew, and with it, the next part of his fate. The tremor in his hand, barely perceptible, was the first crack in the facade. Samir, usually a study in controlled composure, had let a tremor betray the truth. The message, delivered through a trusted intermediary, had changed everything. He was no longer just going through the motions, blending into the tapestry of Beirut. He was aware, and for Leora, perched in her observation post overlooking the city's chaotic symphony of life, that awareness sharpened her focus, making her a hawk circling its prey. The air in the cramped apartment felt thick with the residue of her own breath, the stale scent of instant coffee, and the electric hum of the surveillance equipment. Months, then years, of staring through a lens, of piecing together Samir's life, had become an extension of her own. She knew the way the sunlight fell on his balcony at precisely 10:17 a.m., the cadence of his cough, the precise shade of the coffee he drank each morning. Now, the known rhythms of his existence were shifting, distorting like a funhouse mirror. She observed him from her new vantage point, now stationed in a nondescript building across the street, offering a clearer, if more exposed, view of his apartment. His initial reaction to the message had been subtle, a tightening of his jaw, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name in his eyes. Now, that subtlety was replaced by deliberate action. He began the alterations with his appearance. First, the hair. She watched him emerge from a salon, his previously dark hair, now a lighter shade. A desperate attempt to erase the memory of his former self. It was a cosmetic change, a fleeting mask, but Leora understood its deeper significance. It was an acknowledgement of the hunt, a tangible expression of his fear. The subtle shifts in posture, the way he glanced over his shoulder when he walked, his gait now irregular and more pronounced, made his presence more obvious. His attempts to change were almost comical. The worn leather jacket, the favored disguise, was exchanged for a more casual look that he clearly felt more comfortable wearing. He was moving with a frantic energy, a man frantically attempting to rebuild an unraveling world. The routines, so meticulously crafted, were now abandoned. The regular walks were replaced by a chaotic dance through the city streets. He took different routes to his favorite cafe, a different route to his car. She felt his desperation, the panicked calculation of a hunted animal. Her stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and dread. The stakes had been raised. She recorded it all, the subtle changes, the deliberate missteps, the frantic energy. Her hand, steady for so long, now trembled as she transcribed her notes. Her own isolation was amplified by the walls closing in around Samir. It was a race against time. Would he succeed in slipping away? Or would his frantic attempts to disappear only lead to his downfall? She knew the answer was always the same. No escape. Not in this game. They were all caught in a web, and they were all on a path leading toward the same destination. The salt spray stung Leora's face, a phantom caress mirroring the cold detachment that had become her constant companion. Even as the world around her, for a heartbeat, lurched into screaming chaos, the coastal road hummed with a deceptive serenity, the turquoise of the Mediterranean mirroring the false calm Leora had cultivated within herself, the very air thick with the scent of diesel and secrets. She watched from a nondescript van, its windows tinted, a comfortable distance away from the nexus, the designated extraction point. Her role here was observational, the silent witness to a drama she had orchestrated but would never fully own. The air thrummed with a nervous energy that transcended the mechanical whir of the surveillance equipment. Leora's pulse echoed in her ears, a frantic counterpoint to the measured breaths she forced herself to take. The sun, a malevolent eye, beat down upon the asphalt, turning the already tense atmosphere into a pressure cooker. She could feel the sweat prickling on her forehead, a physical manifestation of the mental strain that had become her daily bread. Years of meticulous observation, of wading through the mundane to unearth the extraordinary, had culminated in this precise moment. Samir Haddad, the ghost she had been tasked with hunting, was about to be made real. She had spent months, years, even immersed in Samir's life, a silent shadow tracing his every move, his every breath. Now, she was close enough to taste his fear. Through her camera lenses, the road had become a canvas, and Samir, a fleeting silhouette, a subject to be captured. She replayed the scene in her mind, a rehearsed dance of anticipation. The extraction team, comprised of seasoned operatives, had rehearsed the operation countless times, each movement, each angle, etched into their muscle memory. They were a symphony of precision, a brutal ballet of calculated violence. Her gaze tracked Samir Esisuver Sadan, the vehicle of familiar presence, now racing towards the extraction point. He was late, a deviation from his established pattern, a fissure in the carefully constructed facade. The realization hit her, a cold certainty that seeped into her bones. He knew. He was aware of the hunt, the invisible net that had closed in around him. His face, visible on her monitor, was a mask of calculated calm, a stoic acceptance that sent a shiver down her spine. The calm before the storm, she thought, the breath before the plunge. She focused on the drone feed, its eye in the sky capturing the broader picture. The extraction team was in position, their vehicles strategically placed to box in Samir's car. The signal would be the blink of the hazard lights on the van, then the operation would begin. It would be quick, brutal, and efficient. The sea, a constant reminder of the immensity of the world, whispered promises of secrets kept. But it was just a setting, a beautiful stage for the terrible performance of the mission. Leora was merely a spectator. The capture, the climax of her long vigil, was now out of her hands. The moment of truth arrived. She watched, she waited, and as the hazard lights blinked, the world held its breath. The silence shattered with the abruptness of a snapped twig, a sound that sliced through the pre-dawn stillness and echoed in Leora's chest. For 3 years, she had lived inside Samir Haddad's shadow, a ghost meticulously charting his existence. Now, in a blink, the ghost had touched the man. Samir had, moments before, been the target, the unknowing star of Leora's one-woman show. But now, his fate had been decided. He was no longer a shadow to be studied, but a man to be captured. She watched from the pre-selected perch, a nondescript apartment overlooking the industrial zone. The pre-dawn light, a bruised purple, was slowly bleeding into the sky, but the warehouse, the designated meeting place, remained a dark, hulking presence. Leora had been a ghost within the ghost, a silent observer charting Samir's life, a silent participant in the intricate ballet of surveillance. Now, she was a watcher on the sidelines, the director with a seat in the gallery, as the scene she helped choreograph unfolded. She'd anticipated a struggle, a chase, a desperate, violent resistance. Instead, it was clinical, swift, a surgical removal. Samir's black sedan, a familiar fixture in her surveillance, had purred to a halt in front of the warehouse. He exited the car, head on a swivel, a characteristic tic she'd come to know intimately. He approached the reinforced steel door, a man walking into a trap he didn't even know existed. The door opened and he entered. Seconds later, a team of operatives, men she knew only by their call signs, swarmed him. There was a flash, a muffled shout, and then silence. The whole operation, a culmination of months of meticulous planning and countless hours of observation, was over in less than a minute. Leora exhaled slowly. The tension she hadn't realized she was holding now released, leaving her feeling hollow. A van, indistinguishable from the other delivery vehicles in the area, emerged from the warehouse. Leora watched it drive away, its trajectory away from the city and towards the coast, her final order. The air around her felt thick, heavy, with the absence of Samir, the absence of the constant, quiet hum of her focus. He was gone, erased from her field of vision, a void in the intricate tapestry of her surveillance. She was not to be a participant in what happened next. His debriefing, his interrogation, the unraveling of his life. Her task was done. Her gaze drifted to the warehouse. From her vantage point, it appeared unremarkable, just another anonymous building in a landscape of concrete and steel. Yet, for so long, it was a space filled with anticipation, the potential climax. Now, it was just an empty shell. The silence was deafening, amplified by the sudden absence of her own internal monologue. For the first time in years, she felt nothing, just a strange emptiness. She took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing herself to focus, to re-establish control. There was no time for reflection, for sentimentality. Her extraction from this assignment was as meticulously planned as the capture itself. The apartment she'd occupied, the equipment she'd used, the identity she'd adopted would be erased. She'd disappear, a phantom in the ether, only to resurface in another location, under another name, pursuing another target. The cycle would begin anew. It had to. The silence, thick and suffocating, had finally arrived. A vacuum where Samir Haddad, once a constant presence in her lens, used to be the apartment, her refuge and observation post for 3 years, felt hollow, the air stale with the ghosts of captured moments. The monitors, now blank screens, stared back like vacant eyes, reflecting the emptiness she now inhabited. The operation was executed with a brutal efficiency that Leora, despite her detachment, couldn't help but acknowledge. She watched from the nearby cafe, the sharp bite of espresso, doing little to cut through the adrenaline. She saw the van, a nondescript vehicle, pull up, the agents moving with a practiced grace. And then the fleeting struggle, the muffled cries. Samir, a phantom, was real. Her job, at least this part of it, was over. Now she faced the void. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of packing, cleaning, and turning off the screens. The apartment, once a vibrant hub of information and data streams, became a sterile shell devoid of the life she'd poured into it. She cleared out her meticulously organized files. The photographs, the notes, the maps that traced Samir's every step. Each deletion was a small severing, a silent burial of the hours, days, and years spent immersed in his world. The city, once a canvas upon which she painted the patterns of Samir's life, felt alien. The bustling streets, once a source of data, were now meaningless. The familiar scent of spices from the market, the distant call to prayer, the incessant honking of horns, all faded into a symphony of noise. She was no longer a shadow, tracking a shadow. She was adrift, a wraith detached from the threads of the world. Sleep became a battleground of fragmented images, fleeting glimpses of Samir's face, the tilt of his head, the way he held his cigarette, all overlaid by the relentless rhythm of surveillance. She would wake up with a jolt, heart hammering, disoriented, the phantom pressure of her headphones still echoing in her ears. The silence grew louder, a constant, gnawing presence. She missed the focus, the purpose, the intricate dance of observation and anticipation. In the absence of Samir, she felt the profound loneliness that had been her silent companion all these years. There were no friends or family here, only a manufactured identity and the cold comfort of her own isolation. Her meals were hasty, eaten in front of blank screens, with the television's vapid chatter doing little to fill the emptiness. She barely noticed the sun rise or set, trapped in the artificial rhythm of her self-imposed exile. The days melted into weeks, and the apartment, once a space of meticulous order, grew untidy, a physical manifestation of her own disarray. Even the routine of ending her days, her preparation for sleep, felt empty. She stared at herself in the mirror, searching for something, a trace of the person she once was, or perhaps even who she was becoming. She was the vessel, the silent observer, the phantom in the machinery of intelligence, her emotions a tool to be suppressed, her life a means to an end. The price of her detachment was the desolation that now enveloped her, a chilling emptiness that threatened to consume her entirely. The capture, the silence, it was all her new reality. The sterile scent of the holding cell was the last thing Samir would smell. The sting of disinfectant, a bitter farewell to the world he had known. The air, thick with the silence of betrayal and the echoing thud of his own heart, was where Leora, her part concluded, would take her leave. The final reports were prepared, the intricate web of observations meticulously transcribed, the culmination of years of quiet, unseen dedication. Now, it was time to hand off the prize to the butcher and wash her hands of it. She stood before her superior, the hard fluorescent lights of the briefing room glinting off the polished table. The man, a veteran of countless operations, accepted the files with a curt nod. No congratulations, no expressions of gratitude, just the professional exchange of information. It was the way things were. He knew better than to treat the hired help like they were a part of something, because they weren't. They were gears in the machine, and easily replaced. The interrogation is scheduled to begin immediately, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He's cooperating, for the most part. The initial assessment is that he's holding back key details, but that's to be expected. You did good work, Leora. The statement was as devoid of warmth as the air in the room. Leora inclined her head, accepting the praise as she always did. She didn't seek affirmation or recognition. Her reward was the completion of the mission, the successful execution of her role. Any positive feedback was only a consequence of fulfilling her duty to her utmost. Her work was done, and she was done here. Will you be observing the interrogation? The man asked, his gaze unwavering. Leora hesitated, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name passing through her. Curiosity? Perhaps. Years spent immersed in Samir's life had created a strange kind of connection, a phantom limb that ached now that the link had been severed. But she knew that lingering would serve no purpose. It would only muddy the waters. No, she said, her voice steady. My contribution is complete. My presence would serve no further purpose. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the sterile room. He had no more instructions. As she passed through the security checkpoint, she handed over her access cards, the tangible symbols of her past life. The world outside, the vibrant, chaotic pulse of Beirut, seemed impossibly loud after the months of quiet observation. It was a sensory overload of sound and light. She felt a phantom pressure in her chest, a weight that only lifted when she started toward the exits. The elevator descended, carrying her away from the sterile confines of the agency. As the doors opened onto the street, she stepped out into the humid evening air. The city, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded, continued its relentless dance. The scent of shawarma and exhaust fumes, the insistent honking of horns, the chatter of voices, all were a stark contrast to the silence she had inhabited for so long. She looked at the paperwork, at the reports, now nothing more than ink and paper. The long years of her life, the sleepless nights, the relentless dedication to a man she had never spoken to, was it all truly worth the brief moment of his surrender? Or was it all just another cycle that would start again somewhere else, with someone else, with another ghost caught in the crosshairs of the machine? She'd never know, not, and survive. Turning away from the building, she walked away, becoming nothing more than another anonymous face in the bustling crowd, ready to vanish into the city, as she always did. The handoff was complete. The ghost was free. The stale air in the cramped debriefing room felt thick with the ghost of Samir Haddad, a presence that clung to the worn linoleum and the harsh fluorescent lights, even though he was gone. Years, meticulously measured out in snatched glances and digitized observations, culminated in a single, brutal moment. His capture, and now the deafening silence. The weight of that absence settled on Leora Benami's shoulders, a crushing emptiness that echoed the void she now inhabited. The capture itself, a blur of motion and efficiency, felt oddly disconnected, a carefully choreographed dance performed by others, while she, the architect of the narrative, had remained a silent, unseen observer. She sat at the metal table, the surface cold against her palms, the final report spread before her like a map of a lost world. Each entry, each meticulously recorded detail, now served as a post-mortem, a clinical dissection of a life she had, in a twisted way, come to know intimately. The subtle tremor in Samir's hand as he paid for the antibiotics, the fleeting sadness in his eyes as he looked out at the ocean, the almost imperceptible widening of his nostrils as he sensed the tightening noose of surveillance, all were documented, analyzed, and now irrelevant. The narrative had reached its inevitable conclusion. The target neutralized, the story closed. Her gaze drifted to the window, the grimy glass blurring the Beirut skyline into a smear of muted colors. She saw the city and the sea where the capture had taken place, and she felt the disconnect. It was another job, and now it was over. The satisfaction, if it had ever truly existed, was long gone, replaced by a hollow ache. The years spent in the shadows, the isolation, the relentless focus on a single, unknowable man had etched a deeper mark than she'd realized. She felt the phantom ache of surveillance, the constant vigilance, the ever-present awareness of being both seen and unseen. The room around her felt sterile, devoid of life, yet her own body buzzed with the suppressed adrenaline of the operation. She'd known for years. She was a professional, built for this. It was her job. She pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor, a sound that echoed the emptiness within her. She knew what came next. The ritual of separation, the shedding of the skin she'd worn for so long. The briefing would be perfunctory, the praise hollow, the next assignment already waiting in the wings. She would hand over the reports, relinquish the threads of the narrative, and fade back into the anonymity of her own existence. But the phantom threads of Samir's life lingered, the echoes of his existence, a constant reminder of the price of her profession. The memories, however faint, would find her. The ghost of his face would haunt her in the silent hours of the night until the next target, the next life, the next shadow arrived. She would have to forget all of it to begin again. The cycle was relentless, a cold, calculated dance of pursuit and capture, a testament to the ruthless efficiency of a world where identities were fluid and the only constant was the relentless gaze of those who controlled the shadows. And tomorrow, she would simply disappear, just like him. The echo of the warehouse door slamming shut still resonated in her ears, a phantom thud against the quiet hum of the city. Leora had watched it all, the swift, silent extraction of Samir Haddad. A symphony of precision played out in the stale air of the industrial district. Now, she was done. The target neutralized. The mission complete. She was no longer a shadow. Following a shadow, she was just Leora, or rather, the temporary vessel she inhabited, ready to be emptied and refilled with the next assignment. The early morning sun, a pale disk struggling to pierce the smog, offered no warmth. Leora pulled her collar higher, the synthetic fabric, a small barrier against the chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. She stood on the edge of the industrial zone, the acrid smell of the port mixing with the subtle perfume of jasmine from a nearby residential area. The air tasted of salt and diesel, a familiar concoction that had become the taste of her life. She took a deep breath, trying to cleanse herself of the metallic tang of the operation, the lingering fear of exposure that had thrummed through her every vein for months. She walked, not with purpose, but with the aimlessness of a wraith. The buildings of Beirut rose around her, a chaotic jumble of concrete and corrugated iron, a landscape scarred by war and neglect. The city breathed around her, its sounds a cacophony of car horns, distant calls to prayer, and the incessant chatter of its inhabitants. She was a ghost in this vibrant tapestry, a thread that could be woven in or out without anyone noticing. Her clothes, carefully chosen for their anonymity, did their job. She was indistinguishable from the other figures hurrying along the sidewalks, their faces etched with the daily struggle of survival. She passed a small cafe, its windows steamy with the promise of coffee and pastries. The aroma was inviting, a reminder of the simple pleasures she had denied herself for so long. She paused, the briefest flicker of a desire to step inside, to join the throng of people huddled around tables, their lives a world away from her own. But the impulse passed, replaced by the ingrained discipline of her profession. To linger was to risk exposure, to invite scrutiny. The faces she saw in the crowd were a blur of expressions: anger, fatigue, hope, despair. They were their lives, complex and messy, a universe of experience she could only observe from a detached vantage point. Their routines would be different. They would experience different emotions, and they would have different friends. She had no one, and she wanted no one. Her world revolved around the next target, the next assignment, the next disappearing act. She reached a busy intersection, the traffic a churning river of cars, scooters, and battered buses. The exhaust fumes stung her eyes, a harsh reminder of the price of progress, the constant, low-level pollution that hung over the city like a shroud. She waited for the light to change, her gaze drifting over the faces around her. A young woman with bright eyes and a phone glued to her ear. An old man clutching a worn copy of the Quran. A street vendor, hawking newspapers, his voice hoarse from shouting. They were all part of the dance, participants in the daily drama of existence. And she was not. As the light turned green, she stepped into the flow of people, her stride long and purposeful, her body merging into the anonymous tide. She looked like anyone. She was anyone. And as she disappeared into the swirling currents of the city, she felt the familiar tendrils of emptiness begin to wrap around her, a comforting nothingness that was both her prison and her sanctuary. The mission was complete, and she was already disappearing. The next assignment was a whisper in the wind, a promise of another life and another inevitable fade into the background. The ghost of Samir Haddad wouldn't disappear, not for Leora. It echoed in the sterile silence of the debriefing room. A phantom limb of a focus, the culmination of years distilled into a single, sterile file. Even now, the memory of his face, contorted with the dawning horror of recognition, was etched onto her mind's eye. A photograph she could not delete. The humid Beirut air pressed against her skin as she walked away from the safe house, the city's cacophony rising around her like a living thing. The operation was over. The subject neutralized. Another file closed. But the weight of it, the grinding, relentless monotony of the hunt, lingered, a phantom ache in her bones. The city was a maze of narrow alleyways and sun-baked facades, a labyrinth of shadows that had been her domain for what felt like an eternity. She navigated the crowded streets, her senses acutely aware of the shifting currents of humanity, the subtle vibrations of threat and opportunity. She was a ghost now. She knew, dissolving into the anonymity of the crowd. No one saw her, not really. They saw a woman with dark hair, a plain face, a drab and unassuming presence, a perfect camouflage. She blended, she observed. She became the blank canvas upon which the lives of others were painted. Her job, the thing she lived and breathed for, was to be unseen, to exist in the periphery, to become a shadow that tracked and waited. The weight of it, the constant vigilance, the relentless focus on another person's life had carved grooves into her soul. She had become so adept at reading the nuances of human behavior, the tiny tells that betrayed secrets, that she could no longer see the world with fresh eyes. Everything was coded, every interaction a potential threat, every conversation a veiled attempt to deceive. She walked past the market, the vibrant colors and aromas a sensory overload she barely registered. The smells of spices, the cries of vendors, the laughter of children. It was a world she was no longer a part of. She was a detached observer, an anthropologist studying a tribe she could never truly join. She felt the hollowness of her existence, the endless repetition of assignments, of faces, of targets. The knowledge that she would soon shed this identity, this life, like a snake shedding its skin, and assume another, was both a comfort and a curse. There was a profound loneliness in her work, a deep ache in the marrow of her bones. She was a solitary creature, a hunter in a world of prey, always watching, always waiting. She knew the game. She knew the rules. She knew the end. She turned a corner, her footsteps echoing in the narrow street. Another city, another target, another life. The cycle began again. The relentless machinery of intelligence grinding onward, the gears of the system turning, and the endless watch of another person would begin. She would have to disappear, to become the shadow again, waiting for the moment when a single data point would bring a new ghost back into her life. Her life, if it could even be called that anymore.